Marcus Thompson sat in the small holding cell of the downtown police station, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete walls. 20 minutes earlier, he had been walking home from his job at the auto parts store when everything went wrong. The police officer who arrested him, Detective Raymond Walsh, stood outside the cell talking to his partner. Walsh was a 15-year veteran of the force, known for his no-nonsense approach and quick temper. He had little patience for what he called excuse makers and even less for people who try to use their military service to get out of trouble. Marcus had tried to explain the situation calmly. He told them about his service in Afghanistan, about the traumatic brain injury that sometimes caused confusion and memory lapses. He mentioned his PTSD and how crowded spaces could trigger panic attacks. But Walsh had cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Save it for someone who cares," Walsh had said. "Every lowlife in this city claims to be a veteran when they get caught. Stop using the veteran excuse and take responsibility for your actions." The incident had started when Marcus walked past a convenience store just as it was being robbed. The perpetrator, a young man in a dark hoodie, had run directly toward Marcus while fleeing the scene. In his confused state, triggered by the sudden chaos and shouting, Marcus had grabbed the man's arm instinctively. The robber broke free and escaped, but when police arrived moments later, witness descriptions were unclear. The store owner, panicked and speaking broken English, had pointed at Marcus when police asked about the suspect. The fact that Marcus was still standing near the scene, disoriented and struggling to process what had happened, made him appear suspicious to the responding officers. Detective Walsh had approached with his weapon drawn, shouting commands that Marcus struggled to understand through the fog of his triggered state. When Marcus didn't respond immediately to orders to get on the ground, Walsh tackled him hard onto the asphalt. During the arrest, Marcus tried repeatedly to explain his military background and his medical condition. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan," Marcus had said while being handcuffed. "I have documentation of my injuries. I was trying to help stop the robber." Walsh had laughed coldly. "Yeah, right. And I'm a Navy SEAL. You people always claim military service when you're caught red-handed. It's pathetic." Now Marcus sat in the cell, wondering how his life had taken such a dark turn. At 34 years old, he had been struggling to readjust to civilian life for over 2 years. The traumatic brain injury from an IED explosion had left him with cognitive difficulties, memory problems, and severe PTSD. Simple tasks that once came naturally now required tremendous effort and concentration. He thought about his apartment, barely furnished with secondhand furniture and military memorabilia that served as reminders of better days. His Purple Heart sat in a dusty frame on a shelf, along with photos of his unit in Afghanistan. Those pictures showed a different Marcus, confident, strong, surrounded by brothers who understood him. The auto parts store job was the first steady employment he had managed to hold since returning home. His supervisor, Mrs. Chun, had been patient with his struggles and had even adjusted his schedule to accommodate his therapy appointments at the VA hospital. Now he worried that spending a night in jail might cost him that job too. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to use the breathing techniques his therapist had taught him. In through the nose, hold for 4 counts, out through the mouth. The technique usually helped calm his racing heart and clear the mental fog, but tonight it wasn't working as well as usual. He could hear Detective Walsh talking to other officers in the hallway, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls. Walsh was telling someone about the arrest, describing Marcus as another wannabe veteran trying to play the sympathy card. "These guys think throwing around military terms will get them out of anything," Walsh said with obvious contempt. "Half of them probably never even left the country, let alone saw combat. It's insulting to real veterans." Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same rage that had gotten him into trouble during his early days back home. But he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that any outburst would only make his situation worse. He had learned the hard way that losing his temper accomplished nothing except creating more problems. The booking process had been humiliating. Walsh had made snide comments throughout, questioning every piece of information Marcus provided. When Marcus gave his military ID number from memory, Walsh had rolled his eyes and muttered something about stolen valor. "Sure you remember your service number, but can't remember robbing a store," Walsh had said. Convenient how that works. Marcus had tried to explain that his memory problems were specifically related to recent events and stressful situations, but Walsh wasn't interested in listening. The detective seemed to have already made up his mind about Marcus's guilt and character. As the hours passed, Marcus began to worry about missing his morning shift at the auto parts store. Mrs. Chun had specifically told him that reliability was crucial for keeping his job. She had been understanding about his condition, but missing work without notice might be the final straw. He also thought about his weekly therapy appointment at the VA hospital. Dr. Martinez had been working with him on coping strategies and helping him process his experiences in Afghanistan. Missing appointments could set back months of progress. The cell was cold, and Marcus's thin jacket provided little warmth against the concrete bench. He tried to find a comfortable position, but the hard surface made it impossible to relax. The constant noise from the busy police station, ringing phones, slamming doors, shouting voices, kept his nerves on edge. Around midnight, a young officer named Collins brought Marcus a cup of water and a stale sandwich. Collins seemed different from Walsh, quieter, more respectful. He didn't make any comments about Marcus's claims of military service, but he didn't express belief either. "Is there anyone you want to call?" Collins asked. "You're allowed one phone call." Marcus thought about his options. He didn't have many close friends or family members he could contact. His parents lived across the country and were already worried enough about his struggles. Calling them would only add to their stress and heartbreak. His ex-girlfriend Sarah might have helped, but their relationship had ended badly when his PTSD symptoms became too much for her to handle. She had tried to be supportive, but the unpredictable mood swings and emotional distance had eventually driven her away. There was his former squad leader, Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, who had stayed in touch after they returned from Afghanistan. But Rodriguez lived 2 states away and had his own family to worry about. Marcus didn't want to burden him with legal problems. "I'll think about it," Marcus told Collins. The night stretched on endlessly. Marcus dozed fitfully, his dreams filled with fragments of memories from Afghanistan mixed with the chaos of the evening's arrest. He woke several times in confusion, momentarily forgetting where he was before the harsh reality crashed back down on him. Detective Walsh's words echoed in his mind. "Stop using the veteran excuse." Those words hurt worse than the physical pain from being thrown to the ground during his arrest. They represented everything wrong with how society viewed struggling veterans. The assumption that military service was just an excuse rather than a source of genuine trauma and difficulty. Marcus had never asked for special treatment because of his service. He had only tried to explain his medical condition and the circumstances that led to his confusion during the incident. But Walsh had interpreted his explanation as manipulation and dishonesty. As dawn approached, Marcus heard increased activity in the police station. Day shift officers were arriving, and the night crew was preparing reports and briefings. He wondered what would happen next, whether he would be formally charged, whether anyone would investigate his claims about military service, whether the real robber would be caught. The uncertainty was almost worse than being in jail. At least in Afghanistan, even during the most dangerous missions, Marcus had known his role and trusted his training. Here in civilian life, he felt lost and powerless, unable to navigate systems that seemed designed to work against people like him. Detective Walsh appeared outside his cell again, coffee cup in hand, and looking refreshed after what was apparently a good night's sleep. His attitude toward Marcus hadn't changed. If anything, he seemed more dismissive after having time to think about the case. "Still sticking to your story about being a war hero?" Walsh asked mockingly. "Because I got some bad news for you. We're going to charge you with robbery and resisting arrest. Your military fairy tale isn't going to help you now." Marcus met Walsh's gaze steadily, drawing on the discipline that had sustained him through 3 combat deployments. He wouldn't give this man the satisfaction of seeing him break down or lose control. Whatever happened next, he would face it with the same courage that had carried him through much worse situations. But inside, Marcus felt his hope beginning to fade. It seemed like no one would listen to the truth, and no one cared about understanding what had really happened. He was just another criminal in their eyes, and his military service meant nothing to them. The morning shift brought new energy to the police station, but Marcus's situation remained unchanged. Detective Walsh had filed his preliminary report, painting Marcus as an uncooperative suspect who fabricated military service to avoid responsibility. The report would later prove to be full of inaccuracies, but for now, it represented the official version of events. Captain Jennifer Hayes arrived at 7:30 for her morning briefing. As the shift commander, she reviewed overnight arrests and significant incidents. Walsh's report caught her attention, not because of any red flags about the arrest, but because of a comment he had made about fake veterans. Captain Hayes had served 12 years in the Army Reserve before joining the police force. She understood the complex challenges facing returning veterans and had implemented several programs to better serve veteran communities. When she read Walsh's dismissive comments about Marcus's claims, something didn't sit right with her. "Detective Walsh," she called from her office. "Can you come in here for a minute?" Walsh approached with his usual confidence, carrying his coffee and wearing the expression of someone who expected praise for a job well done. He had made similar arrests before, and his superiors generally supported his aggressive approach to law enforcement. "Tell me about this robbery suspect you brought in last night," Captain Hayes said, gesturing to the report on her desk. "Standard case," Walsh replied. "Guy was at the scene when we arrived. Witnesses pointed him out. He resisted arrest. Started spinning some story about being a veteran with PTSD when he realized he was in trouble. Did you verify his military service?" Walsh shrugged. "Waste of time. These guys always claim to be veterans. I've heard every sob story in the book." He couldn't even give me basic details about his supposed service. Captain Hayes frowned. "What details did he provide?" "Some nonsense about Afghanistan. Claimed he had a Purple Heart. Said he served 3 tours. Typical wannabe veteran talk." "Did you run his information through the military database?" "Like I said, waste of time. The guy's obviously lying." Captain Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Walsh's face. She had worked with him for 3 years and knew his biases well. Walsh came from a family of police officers and had never served in the military himself. He often expressed skepticism about veteran benefits and programs, viewing them as government waste. "I want you to verify his military service," she ordered. "Run his full name and social security number through the database." Walsh looked annoyed. "Captain, with respect, I don't think we need to enable this guy's fantasy. He's a robbery suspect, not some war hero. Detective, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm giving you a direct order. Verify his service record." Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his cell, trying to prepare himself for what came next. He had been through enough legal troubles since returning from Afghanistan to know that the system rarely worked in favor of people like him. His public defender would probably encourage him to take a plea deal, regardless of his innocence. The irony wasn't lost on him. In Afghanistan, he had been part of a team that trusted each other completely. When he said he had someone's back, they knew they could count on him absolutely. When his squad leader gave an order, Marcus followed it without question because he trusted the man's judgment and experience. Here, in civilian life, nobody trusted anybody. His word meant nothing. His service record meant nothing. His injuries and struggles were seen as excuses rather than legitimate medical conditions. The very people he had fought to protect now viewed him as a threat to society. Officer Collins appeared at his cell again, this time with a different expression on his face. He looked uncertain, almost nervous. "Thompson," Collins said quietly, "the captain wants to see you in her office." Marcus stood slowly, his muscles stiff from the uncomfortable night. "What's this about?" "I'm not sure, but she seems different about your case than Detective Walsh." Collins led Marcus through the busy station to Captain Hayes' office. Along the way, Marcus noticed several officers looking at him with curious expressions. Word had apparently spread about the overnight arrest. Captain Hayes was a woman in her early 40s with short gray hair and intense blue eyes. She wore her uniform with the kind of precision that Marcus recognized from military officers. When she looked at him, he saw something that had been absent from every other interaction since his arrest. She was actually seeing him as a person rather than just a suspect. "Mr. Thompson," she said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit down." Detective Walsh stood near the window, his arms crossed, and his expression clearly showing his displeasure with this meeting. He had obviously been overruled on something, and he wasn't happy about it. "I understand you've claimed to be a military veteran," Captain Hayes continued. Marcus felt his heart sink. Here it comes again, he thought. Another person who doesn't believe me. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with the 101st Airborne Division. I was medically retired after an IED explosion caused a traumatic brain injury." Captain Hayes nodded slowly. "What was your unit designation?" 2nd Battalion, 502nd Infantry Regiment. "We were part of Strike Brigade." "Who was your commanding officer during your second deployment?" Marcus felt a spark of hope. These were specific questions that only someone with real military knowledge would ask. "Lieutenant Colonel Davidson during most of the deployment. Major Richards took over when Davidson was wounded in an ambush." Detective Walsh rolled his eyes. He could have looked all this up online. Captain Hayes ignored Walsh and continued her questioning. "What was your MOS?" 11B, Infantry, but I cross-trained as a marksman and often worked with reconnaissance units. "Tell me about the IED incident that caused your injury." Marcus took a deep breath. This was always the hardest part, reliving the moment that changed everything. "We were on patrol in Kandahar province. 3rd vehicle in a convoy. I was riding shotgun when we hit a pressure plate IED buried in the road. The explosion flipped our MRAP and killed 2 of my squad mates instantly." His voice remained steady, but Captain Hayes could see the pain in his eyes. She had heard enough genuine combat stories to recognize authenticity when she saw it. "I was unconscious for 3 days," Marcus continued. "When I woke up in the field hospital, they told me I had a severe traumatic brain injury and would need extensive rehabilitation." Captain Hayes pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "Detective Walsh ran your service record through the military database this morning." Walsh looked uncomfortable for the first time since Marcus had met him. "Captain, I still think... Detective, would you like to tell Mr. Thompson what you found?" Walsh remained silent, his jaw clenched in obvious frustration. Captain Hayes opened the folder and began reading. "Marcus Thompson, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Served from 2008 to 2016. 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. Awarded the Purple Heart, Bronze Star with V Device for Valor, Combat Infantry Badge, and numerous other decorations. Medically retired due to traumatic brain injury sustained in combat." The room fell completely silent except for the distant sounds of the busy police station. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being believed. Detective Walsh's face had gone pale. The database could be wrong." Captain Hayes fixed him with a stern look. "The database also includes detailed medical records showing Mr. Thompson's ongoing treatment for PTSD and traumatic brain injury at the VA hospital. It shows regular therapy appointments and prescribed medications." She turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, can you tell me exactly what happened at the convenience store last night?" Marcus took his time, carefully explaining the confusion and disorientation he had experienced. He described how the robber had run directly toward him, triggering his military training to respond to threats. He explained how his brain injury made it difficult to process rapidly changing situations. "I wasn't trying to help the robber escape," Marcus said. "I was trying to stop him, but when everything happened so fast, and then the police arrived shouting orders, I couldn't think clearly. I've been working with my therapist on managing these episodes, but sometimes they still overwhelm me." Captain Hayes made notes as he spoke. She asked clarifying questions that showed she understood both military training and PTSD symptoms. Unlike Walsh's interrogation style, her questions were designed to gather information rather than trap him in contradictions. "Mr. Thompson," she said finally, "I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding about what happened last night." Detective Walsh stepped forward. "Captain, with all due respect, his military service doesn't change the fact that he was at the scene of crime. Detective, his military service explains why he was confused and disoriented. It explains why he might have responded to a threat in ways that appeared suspicious to witnesses. Most importantly, it establishes his credibility in a way that completely contradicts your assumptions about his character." Captain Hayes stood up and walked around her desk. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to personally review the evidence in your case. I'm also going to speak with the store owner and other witnesses myself. I suspect there's much more to this story than what's in the initial report." For the first time in over 12 hours, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Someone in authority was willing to listen to him and investigate the truth rather than simply accepting the first version of events. In the meantime, Captain Hayes continued, "I'm releasing you on your own recognizance. You're not being charged at this time, pending further investigation." Detective Walsh looked shocked. "Captain, I strongly object to this decision." "Your objection is noted, Detective, but this is my call to make." As Marcus prepared to leave, Captain Hayes pulled him aside. "Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that not everyone in law enforcement views veterans the way Detective Walsh does. Many of us recognize the sacrifices you've made and the challenges you face coming home." Marcus nodded, still struggling to process this dramatic turn of events. "Thank you for listening, Captain. That's all I ever wanted, just someone willing to hear the truth." Walking out of the police station into the bright morning sunlight, Marcus felt like he had been given a second chance. But he also knew that this was far from over. The real robber was still out there, and questions remained about what had really happened at the convenience store. Word spread quickly through the police station about Captain Hayes' decision to release Marcus Thompson. The story of Detective Walsh's dismissive treatment of a decorated combat veteran created an uncomfortable tension among the officers. Some supported Walsh, believing that military service shouldn't excuse criminal behavior. Others began questioning whether their department was properly trained to handle veterans experiencing PTSD episodes. Captain Hayes spent the morning reviewing security footage from the convenience store and surrounding businesses. What she discovered painted a very different picture than Walsh's initial report suggested. The store's surveillance camera clearly showed Marcus walking past the building when the robber burst through the door. The footage captured Marcus's instinctive reaction, stepping forward and grabbing the fleeing suspect in what appeared to be an attempt to stop him. The video also revealed something else significant. The robber was a young white male, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a slim build. Marcus was 6 feet 2 inches tall, African-American, and had the muscular build typical of former infantry soldiers. The physical differences made it impossible for any reasonable witness to confuse the two men, even in low-light conditions. Captain Hayes called the store owner, Mr. Park, and asked him to come in for another interview. When he arrived, she showed him the surveillance footage and asked him to carefully review what had happened. "I was very scared," Mr. Park explained through a translator. "Young man with gun took money from register. I hide behind counter. When police ask who robbed store, I point a tall man outside because he only person I see clearly. But now I watch video, I see you try to stop robber, not help him." The miscommunication had been tragic, but understandable. In the chaos and fear following an armed robbery, Mr. Park had simply pointed at the most visible person when police asked about the perpetrator. He hadn't intended to falsely accuse Marcus, but language barriers and trauma had created a perfect storm of misunderstanding. Captain Hayes also interviewed the other witnesses who had been in the area. Most had seen very little of the actual incident, but several confirmed that they had seen someone trying to stop the robber rather than helping him escape. Their descriptions of the Good Samaritan matched Marcus perfectly. Detective Walsh was not pleased with these developments. He had built his reputation on quick arrests and high conviction rates. Having a high-profile case unravel due to his failure to conduct proper investigation threatened to damage his standing within the department. "Captain, I still say there's something fishy about this whole situation," Walsh argued during their afternoon meeting. "Maybe he wasn't the robber, but He could have been involved somehow. Captain Hayes looked at him with growing frustration. Detective, what possible evidence do you have for that theory? He was disoriented and confused when we arrived. That could indicate drug use or consciousness of guilt. Or it could indicate a PTSD episode triggered by sudden violence and chaos, exactly as he claimed. Walsh wasn't ready to give up. His behavior during arrest was suspicious. He didn't follow commands properly. Because he has a documented brain injury that affects his ability to process rapid instructions under stress. The conversation was interrupted by Officer Collins, who knocked on the office door with an urgent expression. "Captain," Collins said, "we just got a call from the Veterans Administration Hospital. They said Marcus Thompson missed his therapy appointment this morning, and they're concerned because he never misses sessions without calling ahead." Captain Hayes felt a pang of guilt. Marcus had missed his appointment because he was sitting in their jail cell, being treated like a criminal instead of receiving the medical care he needed. "Give me the number for his therapist," she ordered. "I want to speak with someone who can help me understand his condition better." 20 minutes later, Captain Hayes was on the phone with Dr. Maria Martinez, Marcus's psychiatrist at the VA hospital. Dr. Martinez had been working with Marcus for over a year and provided valuable insights into his struggles and progress. "Marcus is one of my most dedicated patients," Dr. Martinez explained. "He rarely misses appointments and works very hard in therapy. His PTSD symptoms are primarily triggered by sudden loud noises, crowded spaces, and situations that remind him of combat. When triggered, he can become disoriented and have difficulty processing information. Could such an episode cause him to appear suspicious or uncooperative to police officers?" Absolutely. During a severe episode, Marcus might seem confused, might not respond appropriately to verbal commands, or might appear agitated even when he's actually trying to comply. It's not intentional noncompliance. His brain literally cannot process information normally during these episodes. Captain Hayes took detailed notes. "Is there anything else officers should know when interacting with him?" Marcus responds much better to calm, clear communication than to shouting or aggressive behavior. His military background actually makes him want to cooperate with authority figures, but his injury makes it difficult for him to do so effectively during stressful situations. After ending the call, Captain Hayes realized how badly her department had failed Marcus Thompson. Not only had they arrested an innocent man, they had done so in exactly the wrong way for someone with his medical condition. The aggressive arrest tactics had likely made his symptoms worse and prolonged his confusion. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned to his apartment and tried to salvage what remained of his day. He called Mrs. Chun at the auto parts store to explain his absence, carefully describing his legal troubles without going into too much detail about his military service. To his relief, Mrs. Chun was understanding and told him to come in for his afternoon shift. But the stress of the previous night had taken its toll. Marcus found himself jumping at every sudden sound, struggling to concentrate on simple tasks, and fighting off waves of anxiety. The familiar symptoms of a PTSD flare-up were building, and he knew he needed to call Dr. Martinez's office to reschedule his missed appointment. The receptionist at the VA hospital informed him that Dr. Martinez had already heard about his situation from Captain Hayes and had cleared her schedule to see him that afternoon. She said to tell you that missing one appointment for circumstances beyond your control is nothing to worry about, the receptionist added kindly. She'll see you at 2 o'clock. At the auto parts store, Marcus struggled through his shift. His supervisor noticed his distraction and suggested he take frequent breaks. The work was normally routine and calming for Marcus, organizing inventory, helping customers find parts, operating the cash register. But today, even simple tasks felt overwhelming. A customer's car backfired in the parking lot, and Marcus dove behind the counter instinctively, his heart racing as combat memories flooded back. Mrs. Chun found him there several minutes later, breathing heavily and trying to regain his composure. "Marcus," she said gently, "why don't you go home early today? You've been through a lot." "I can't afford to miss more work," Marcus replied. "I need this job." "Your job is safe," Mrs. Chun assured him. "Take care of yourself first." Back at the police station, Captain Hayes was preparing for what she knew would be a difficult conversation with her superiors. The false arrest of a decorated veteran would likely attract media attention and raise questions about police training and procedures. More importantly, it highlighted serious gaps in how her department handled interactions with people experiencing mental health crises. She called a meeting with the department's training coordinator to discuss implementing better protocols for recognizing and responding to PTSD episodes. The conversation revealed that very few officers had received any training on veteran issues or trauma responses. "We get maybe an hour on mental health awareness during academy training," the coordinator explained, "but nothing specific about military veterans or combat trauma." Captain Hayes made a note to research training programs specifically designed to help law enforcement work with veteran populations. She had heard about programs in other cities that brought together police officers and veteran advocates to develop better response protocols. Detective Walsh remained resistant to the idea that he had made any serious mistakes. During his afternoon break, he complained to other officers about political correctness and suggested that the department was giving special treatment to criminals who claimed military service. "Next thing you know, everyone we arrest will claim to be a veteran," Walsh grumbled. "We can't run background checks on every sob story we hear." Officer Collins, who had been thinking about the case all day, finally spoke up. "Detective, doesn't it seem like maybe we should verify someone's story before we dismiss it completely? Especially when they're giving specific details about their service?" Walsh glared at the younger officer. "Collins, you've been on the force for what, 2 years? When you've got my experience, you'll understand that most people lie when they're caught." But he wasn't lying, Collins pointed out. The captain confirmed his entire story. The exchange was overheard by several other officers, and Walsh realized his position was becoming increasingly isolated. Even officers who generally supported aggressive policing tactics were beginning to question whether proper procedures had been followed. As the afternoon progressed, Captain Hayes received more information that further vindicated Marcus. The actual robber had been arrested during an attempted carjacking 3 blocks from the original crime scene. The suspect, 19-year-old Danny Martinez, matched the physical description from the surveillance footage and had been caught with the stolen money and weapon. When questioned, Danny admitted to the convenience store robbery and expressed confusion about why someone else had been arrested. He remembered the tall man who had tried to grab him during his escape, describing Marcus as someone who had clearly been trying to stop him rather than help him. Captain Hayes now had complete confirmation that Marcus Thompson was not only innocent, but had actually been a good Samaritan who tried to prevent a criminal's escape. The department had arrested a decorated veteran for attempting to help stop a crime. She knew the next step would be equally important. How the department handled this mistake would determine whether they could rebuild trust with the veteran community and prevent similar incidents in the future. The evening news was already starting to pick up the story. A local veterans advocacy group had been contacted by someone familiar with the case, and questions were being raised about police treatment of veterans with PTSD. Captain Hayes realized that very soon, the entire city would be watching how her department responded to this situation. The decisions made in the next few hours would have consequences that extended far beyond one wrongful arrest. News of Marcus Thompson's wrongful arrest reached the local veterans community faster than Captain Hayes had anticipated. Sarah Rodriguez, executive director of the Veteran Support Network, received a phone call from a concerned citizen who had witnessed the arrest and recognized the signs of a veteran in distress. Sarah had served 2 tours in Iraq as a military police officer before transitioning to veteran advocacy work. She understood both sides of law enforcement interactions and had spent years building relationships with police departments to improve their response to veteran-related incidents. "This is exactly what we've been trying to prevent," Sarah told her assistant while reviewing the preliminary details. A combat veteran with PTSD gets caught in a chaotic situation, and instead of getting help, he gets arrested because officers don't understand his condition. She immediately began making phone calls to other veteran organizations in the area. Within hours, word had spread through informal networks that connected former military personnel across the city. Social media posts started appearing, sharing Marcus's story and calling for justice. At the same time, Captain Hayes was dealing with increasing pressure from her own chain of command. Police Chief Michael Barrett had been briefed on the situation and was deeply concerned about the potential for negative publicity and community backlash. "Captain, I need to understand exactly how this happened," Chief Barrett said during their emergency meeting. "We've got a decorated combat veteran who was wrongfully arrested for trying to stop a crime. The optics alone are a disaster." Captain Hayes presented her findings methodically. "Sir, it appears to be a combination of communication breakdown, inadequate training, and Detective Walsh's personal biases against veteran claims. The physical evidence clearly shows Mr. Thompson was trying to help, not commit a crime. What about Detective Walsh's conduct? I'm reading reports that he dismissed the suspect's military service without any verification." "That's correct, sir." Walsh assumed Thompson was lying about his service record and made derogatory comments about veterans using their service as an excuse. Chief Barrett rubbed his temples. He had served in the Navy Reserve himself and knew many veterans struggled with readjustment issues. The idea that one of his officers had treated a Purple Heart recipient with such disrespect was deeply troubling. "I want a full internal affairs investigation," he ordered, "and I want to personally apologize to Mr. Thompson." Meanwhile, Marcus was trying to process everything that had happened during his therapy session with Dr. Martinez. The familiar office with its comfortable chairs and calming colors provided a safe space to work through his emotions. "I keep thinking about what that detective said," Marcus told her. "Stop using the veteran excuse. Those words keep replaying in my head." Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. "That must have been incredibly painful to hear, especially when you were already in a triggered state. It made me feel like everything I went through in Afghanistan meant nothing. Like my service was just an excuse to avoid responsibility instead of something that fundamentally changed who I am. Marcus, your service and your sacrifices are real and valid. One officer's ignorant comments don't diminish your valor or your struggles. But I'm concerned about how this incident might affect your progress." They spent the session working through Marcus's feelings of anger, shame, and helplessness. Dr. Martinez helped him understand that his reaction to the convenience store incident had been a normal response for someone with his condition, not a character flaw or personal failure. "Your instinct to try to stop the robber shows that your moral compass and desire to protect others remain strong," she explained. "That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." As news of the incident continued to spread, other veterans began reaching out to offer support. Marcus received phone calls from members of his former unit, local veteran service organizations, and complete strangers who had heard his story and wanted to help. One call came from Master Sergeant James Wilson, a fellow Afghanistan veteran who worked with the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post. "Brother, I heard what happened to you," Wilson said. "Nobody should have to go through that alone. We've got your back." Wilson explained that the veteran community was organizing a peaceful demonstration to raise awareness about PTSD and the challenges facing returning warriors. "We're not protesting the police," he clarified. "We're advocating for better training and understanding." The demonstration was planned for the next afternoon outside the police station. Veterans from multiple organizations had committed to attending in their military uniforms to show solidarity with Marcus and highlight the sacrifices made by service members. Detective Walsh learned about the planned demonstration and became increasingly defensive about his handling of the case. He felt that he was being unfairly vilified for doing his job and arresting a suspicious individual at a crime scene. "This whole thing is getting blown out of proportion," Walsh complained to his partner, Detective Kim Santos. "I made an arrest based on witness statements and suspicious behavior. How was I supposed to know he was telling the truth about being in the military?" Santos, who had generally supported Walsh's aggressive policing style, found herself questioning his approach for the first time. "Ray, maybe that's the point. Maybe we should verify these things instead of just assuming people are lying. Every criminal claims to be a veteran these days," Walsh insisted. "If we stopped to check every sob story, we'd never get anything done." But this guy wasn't lying. His story was completely true. Walsh fell silent, unable to argue with the facts, but unwilling to admit that his preconceptions had led to a serious mistake. Sarah Rodriguez spent the evening coordinating with police department leadership about the planned demonstration. She wanted to ensure it remained peaceful and constructive rather than confrontational. "Our goal is education, not condemnation," she told Chief Barrett during their phone conversation. "We want to help your officers understand what they're dealing with when they encounter veterans in crisis." Chief Barrett appreciated her approach. "Ms. Rodriguez, I think this could be an opportunity for positive dialogue. Would you be willing to work with us on developing better training protocols?" "Absolutely. We've been trying to establish those kinds of partnerships for years." They agreed that the demonstration would include a brief educational presentation about PTSD and veteran issues, followed by an opportunity for dialogue between law enforcement and veteran advocates. Captain Hayes worked late into the night, preparing a comprehensive report on the incident and recommendations for preventing similar occurrences. Her recommendations included mandatory training on veteran issues, protocols for verifying military service claims, and partnerships with veteran service organizations. She also recommended disciplinary action for Detective Walsh, including additional training on bias awareness and cultural sensitivity. While she didn't believe Walsh had acted with malicious intent, his prejudices and poor judgment had created a serious problem for the department. The local news media began covering the story that evening, interviewing veteran advocates, and presenting it as an example of broader issues facing returning service members. The coverage was generally balanced, focusing on systemic problems rather than attacking individual officers. Marcus watched the news coverage from his apartment, still struggling to believe that his personal nightmare had become a public issue. Part of him felt grateful for the support from the veteran community, but another part felt uncomfortable with the attention. His phone rang constantly with interview requests from reporters and offers of assistance from veteran organizations. He appreciated the support, but wasn't sure he was ready to become a public face for veteran rights. "I just want to get back to normal," he told Sarah Rodriguez when she called to check on him. "I don't want to be famous for getting arrested." "Marcus, I understand that impulse," Sarah replied. "But your story could help prevent this from happening to other veterans. Sometimes we have to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable." She explained that many veterans faced similar challenges with law enforcement, often without the eventual vindication that Marcus had received. His case presented an opportunity to create positive change that could benefit countless other struggling veterans. "You don't have to decide tonight," Sarah added, "but think about whether sharing your story might help other people who are going through similar struggles." As Marcus prepared for bed, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 24 hours. He had gone from being a convicted criminal in the eyes of the law to being the center of a movement for veteran rights and police reform. The irony wasn't lost on him. In Afghanistan, he had fought to protect American freedoms and values. Now, back home, he was fighting for those same principles in a very different kind of battle. Tomorrow would bring the demonstration, more media attention, and difficult decisions about how public he wanted to be about his struggles. But for tonight, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a sense that he wasn't alone in his fight anymore. The veteran community had rallied around him, law enforcement leadership was taking his case seriously, and changes might actually result from his traumatic experience. It wasn't the way he would have chosen to make a difference, but it was an opportunity to turn something negative into positive change for others facing similar challenges. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Marcus thought about his fallen squad mates from Afghanistan and wondered if they would be proud of how he was handling this civilian battle. He hoped they would understand that sometimes the hardest fights happen after you come home. The demonstration began at noon outside the Central Police Station, but it looked nothing like the typical protests that had become common in recent years. Instead of angry chants and confrontational signs, more than 200 veterans stood in silent formation, wearing their dress uniforms and military decorations with dignified solemnity. Marcus arrived 30 minutes before the scheduled start, still uncertain about his decision to participate. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Veterans from every branch of service and multiple generations stood together, men and women who had served in Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Purple Heart recipients stood next to Bronze Star holders, sergeants next to colonels, all united in support of a fellow veteran who had been failed by the system they had sworn to protect. Sarah Rodriguez approached Marcus with a gentle smile. "How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Marcus admitted, looking at the sea of uniforms. "I never expected anything like this. These people understand your struggle because they've lived it themselves. Every veteran here has faced challenges coming home. Many have dealt with PTSD, TBI, or other invisible wounds of war." At exactly noon, Master Sergeant Wilson called the formation to attention. 200 veterans snapped into perfect military bearing, their synchronized movement a powerful reminder of their shared discipline and service. Local news cameras captured the moment as the formation rendered honors to the American flag. Chief Barrett watched from his office window, visibly moved by the display of military precision and solidarity. He had served in the Navy Reserve for 8 years and recognized the profound respect being shown by these veterans for their country and each other, even in the midst of seeking justice for one of their own. Captain Hayes stood at the chief's side, equally impressed. "Sir, I've never seen anything like this. They're not protesting, they're bearing witness." "It's exactly what we needed to see," Chief Barrett replied. "These are people who dedicated their lives to serving others. If we fail one of them, we failed all of them." Detective Walsh remained in his office, unwilling to watch the demonstration, but unable to ignore its significance. Several of his colleagues had made pointed comments about the difference between this gathering and typical protests. The veteran's dignity and restraint made his dismissive treatment of Marcus look even worse by comparison. After the formation rendered honors, Sarah Rodriguez stepped forward to address the gathered crowd and media representatives. Her words were measured and respectful, but their impact was undeniable. "We stand here today not in anger, but in hope," she began. "We represent thousands of veterans who have returned from military service only to find that the transition home can be more challenging than any battlefield they faced overseas." She explained that Marcus Thompson's experience was not unique, but rather symptomatic of broader misunderstandings about combat trauma and veteran needs. When a veteran tells you they're struggling with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, they are not making excuses. They are sharing the very real consequences of their service to this nation. The crowd remained silent and respectful as Sarah outlined specific recommendations for improving police interactions with veterans. She spoke about the need for training programs, veteran liaison officers, and protocols for recognizing and responding to PTSD episodes. "We are not here to condemn law enforcement," Sarah emphasized. "Many police officers are veterans themselves, and they understand these challenges. We are here to build bridges, not walls." Chief Barrett had planned to make a public statement, but watching the demonstration convinced him that something more personal was needed. Against the advice of his public affairs officer, he walked outside to address the veterans directly. A murmur went through the formation as the chief approached the microphone. This kind of direct engagement between police leadership and protesters was unusual, but Chief Barrett felt the situation demanded a personal response. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I stand before you today as both a police chief and a fellow veteran. What happened to Staff Sergeant Thompson represents a failure of our training, our procedures, and our understanding of the challenges facing those who have served our country." He looked directly at Marcus, who stood in the front row, still wearing his civilian clothes, but surrounded by uniformed veterans who had claimed him as their brother. "Staff Sergeant Thompson, on behalf of this department and this city, I offer you our sincere apology. You deserved better treatment from the officers who swore to serve and protect all citizens, especially those who have already served their country with such distinction." The chief's words carried across the silent crowd and were broadcast live on local television. For many veterans watching, It was the first time they had heard a law enforcement leader acknowledge the unique challenges they faced. Chief Barrett continued, "Today marks the beginning of significant changes in how this department interacts with our veteran community. We will be implementing comprehensive training on veteran issues, establishing a veteran liaison program, and working closely with organizations like the Veteran Support Network to ensure incidents like this never happen again." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he listened to the chief's words. After months of feeling invisible and misunderstood, he was finally being recognized not as a problem to be solved, but as a person deserving of respect and understanding. The chief concluded his remarks by announcing that Detective Walsh would be attending mandatory training on veteran issues and bias awareness. While he didn't specify additional disciplinary measures publicly, he made it clear that the detective's conduct was unacceptable and would not be tolerated in the future. Following the chief's remarks, Dr. Martinez stepped forward to provide a brief educational presentation about PTSD and traumatic brain injury. Her explanation helped the gathered police officers and media representatives understand the medical reality behind veteran struggles. When someone experiences a PTSD episode, their brain literally returns to a combat state, she explained. They may appear confused, uncooperative, or even aggressive, but they are actually experiencing a medical emergency, not engaging in criminal behavior. Several police officers in the crowd took notes as Dr. Martinez described specific techniques for recognizing and responding to trauma episodes. Her presentation transformed what could have been a confrontational situation into a valuable learning opportunity. Officer Collins, who had been watching from the station entrance, approached Captain Hayes with a thoughtful expression. "Captain, I'd like to volunteer for any veteran liaison training programs the department develops. After seeing how this case unfolded, I think I need to understand these issues better." Captain Hayes smiled. Collins represented the kind of officer who could help bridge the gap between law enforcement and veteran communities. His willingness to learn from mistakes rather than defend them gave her hope for meaningful change. As the formal demonstration concluded, something unexpected happened. Individual veterans began approaching police officers to share their own stories and experiences. What had started as a protest evolved into genuine dialogue between two groups that served the same community in different ways. Marcus found himself surrounded by fellow veterans offering support, encouragement, and practical assistance. Several provided contact information for job opportunities, mental health resources, and social activities designed specifically for combat veterans. "Brother, you're not alone in this fight anymore," said Colonel Patricia Williams, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with PTSD for decades before finding effective treatment. "We got a whole network of people who understand what you're going through." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah Rodriguez approached Marcus with a formal offer. "We'd like you to consider becoming a spokesperson for our veteran advocacy efforts. Your story has already made a difference, and your voice could help us reach even more people." Marcus considered the offer carefully. Part of him still wanted to retreat into privacy and anonymity, but he had seen the power of speaking truth about veteran experiences. If sharing his story could prevent other veterans from experiencing similar treatment, perhaps it was worth the discomfort. "I'll think about it," he told Sarah, "but I want to make sure I'm ready to handle the responsibility that comes with being a public figure." 3 months later, Marcus Thompson stood before a packed auditorium at the police academy, sharing his story with a new class of recruits. The mandatory training program on veteran issues had become a cornerstone of the department's curriculum, and Marcus's firsthand account provided powerful context for the academic material. Detective Walsh sat in the back row, having completed his own remedial training on bias awareness and cultural sensitivity. While he remained skeptical about some aspects of veteran advocacy, he had gained a grudging respect for Marcus's dignity and service record. The changes implemented following the incident had far-reaching effects beyond the police department. Other agencies adopted similar training programs. Veteran service organizations received increased funding and support, and public awareness of veteran issues reached new levels. Marcus had found his calling as an advocate and educator, using his painful experience to create positive change for others. He continued working at the auto parts store, but spent his evenings and weekends speaking to police departments, community groups, and veteran organizations about the challenges facing returning service members. His relationship with Captain Hayes had evolved into a professional partnership focused on improving law enforcement response to veteran-related incidents. Together, they had developed protocols that were being adopted by police departments across the state. You know what the irony is? Marcus told Dr. Martinez during one of their regular sessions. Detective Walsh told me to stop using the veteran excuse, but it turned out that being a veteran wasn't an excuse, it was an explanation. And once people understood the explanation, everything changed. Dr. Martinez smiled. Your service in Afghanistan prepared you to face external enemies. But the battle you fought here at home, standing up for yourself and other veterans, that required a different kind of courage. Marcus nodded, thinking about how far he had come from that terrifying night in the jail cell. The experience that had initially seemed like his lowest point had actually become the catalyst for the most meaningful work of his life. He still struggled with PTSD symptoms and the effects of his traumatic brain injury, but he no longer felt alone in those struggles. The veteran community that had rallied around him during his crisis had become a permanent source of strength and purpose. As he prepared for his next speaking engagement at a suburban police department, Marcus reflected on the unexpected ways life could change. Sometimes the worst experiences could become the foundation for the best outcomes, if you had the courage to transform pain into purpose and isolation into community. Detective Walsh's dismissive words, "Stop using the veteran excuse," had unintentionally sparked a movement that was improving lives across the country. In the end, Marcus's military service wasn't an excuse for anything. It was the source of his strength, his identity, and his commitment to serving others, even after hanging up his uniform.